This is the story of three companies, more than 130 years of competition, and why the question of who makes the best soda has three completely different answers in 2026. The three companies are Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, and Keurig Dr. Pepper. And together, they sell almost every can of soda you've ever bought in a grocery store, gas station, or vending machine in America. But the word best hides a problem. Best by what measure? Biggest market share? Most revenue? Fastest growth? The brand your grandkids actually want to drink? Because depending on which question you ask, you get a different winner. And the answers in 2026 are not what most people expect. Pepsi has been knocked out of second place for the first time in living memory. A canned water company started by a former Netflix designer is worth $1.4 billion. And the soda Americans grew up associating with a 1980s marketing disaster is, somehow, still the king of the entire industry. To understand how we got here, we have to go back to where it all started. Three pharmacies in the American South in the 1880s. In December of 1885, a pharmacist named Charles Alderton was working at Morrison's Old Corner drugstore in Waco, Texas. He was experimenting with combinations of fruit syrups, and the drink he eventually settled on used 23 different flavors blended with phosphoric acid. Customers would walk in and ask the soda jerk to shoot me a Waco. The store's owner, Wade Morrison, eventually renamed it Dr. Pepper, and that drink became the oldest major soft drink still sold in America today. It predates Coca-Cola by about 5 months. 5 months later, in May of 1886, an Atlanta pharmacist and former Confederate colonel named John Stith Pemberton mixed up his own concoction at a place called Jacob's Pharmacy. His original recipe used coca leaf extract, yes, the kind that contains cocaine, along with cola nut for caffeine and sugar syrup. He'd actually invented an earlier version the year before called Pemberton's French Wine Coca, but Atlanta passed prohibition laws and he had to take the alcohol out. His bookkeeper, a man named Frank Mason Robinson, came up with the name Coca-Cola and wrote the now iconic Spencerian script logo. The drink sold about 9 glasses a day in its first year. Pemberton, who was a morphine addict, sold off pieces of his interest before he died. The man who eventually consolidated control was Asa Candler, who paid roughly $2,300 in total. By 1903, the cocaine was gone. By 1919, the company had been sold again to a group led by Ernest Woodruff for $25 million. And in 1923, Robert Woodruff took over and ran the company for the next 60 years. The third major player started in a drugstore in New Bern, North Carolina. In 1893, a pharmacist named Caleb Bradham mixed up something he called Brad's Drink. He renamed it Pepsi-Cola in 1898, a name that, despite what people assume, was a play on the word dyspepsia. It was supposed to help with indigestion. It never actually contained the digestive enzyme pepsin. And here's where Pepsi's history gets interesting, because for the next several decades, Pepsi nearly died. Twice. The first time was in 1923. Bradham had bought enormous quantities of sugar at 28 cents a pound during World War I, expecting prices to rise. They crashed instead. Pepsi went bankrupt and was sold off for $30,000. The trademark itself went to a man named Roy Megergel for $35,000. The company went bankrupt a second time in 1931, in the depths of the Great Depression. It was rescued by a candy company called Loft, Incorporated, run by a man named Charles Guth. And Guth only got into the soda business because Coca-Cola had refused to give him a wholesale discount on syrup. He reformulated the drink, and in 1934, launched a 12-ounce bottle for the same nickel that bought you a 6-ounce Coke. The slogan was twice as much for a nickel, too. That single decision saved Pepsi. Here's the lesser-known footnote. Between 1922 and 1933, Coca-Cola was offered the chance to buy Pepsi 3 separate times. They turned it down every time. By the 1960s, both companies were consolidating into giants. In June of 1965, Pepsi-Cola merged with a snack company called Frito-Lay to form what we now know as PepsiCo. Frito-Lay itself had been formed 4 years earlier when the Frito company merged with H.W. Lay and Company. That merger is, in retrospect, one of the most important business decisions of the entire soda war, because it meant Pepsi was never just a soda company. It was a soda company that also sold chips. And as we'll see, that decision changes who's actually winning today. The 1970s and 80s gave us what people call the Cola Wars. And if you're old enough to remember them, you remember the Pepsi Challenge. The Pepsi Challenge was launched in 1975 by a Pepsi executive named Larry Smith. It was a simple idea: set up tables in shopping malls, give people 2 unmarked cups of cola, and ask which one tasted better. Pepsi consistently won. The campaign ran for years, and by the early 1980s, it had Coca-Cola genuinely worried. Coke's market share was slipping. Internal taste tests at Coca-Cola were showing that consumers actually preferred the sweeter Pepsi formula in blind tests. So in April of 1985, Coca-Cola did something almost unbelievable in retrospect. On April 23rd, they replaced their 99-year-old formula with a sweeter, smoother version they called New Coke. The backlash was immediate and ferocious. Consumers were furious. Hotlines were flooded with complaints. Bottles of the original were being hoarded. Less than 3 months later, on July 11, 1985, the company brought back the original recipe under the name Coca-Cola Classic. The CEO at the time, Roberto Goizueta, was asked whether the whole thing had been a brilliant marketing ploy. His answer became famous: "We are not that smart, and we're not that dumb." While Coke was reeling at home, Pepsi was pulling off something even stranger overseas. The story actually starts in 1959, when Vice President Richard Nixon and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev had what's now called the kitchen debate at a trade exhibition in Moscow. Pepsi's then CEO Donald Kendall arranged for Khrushchev to be photographed sipping a Pepsi. That photo opportunity led, in 1972, to Pepsi getting an exclusive contract to sell its product in the Soviet Union, locking Coca-Cola out of the largest untapped market in the world for over a decade. But the USSR couldn't pay in dollars because Soviet rubles weren't convertible, so Pepsi was paid in Stolichnaya vodka. Then, in 1989, the deal got bigger and weirder. The Soviets agreed to give Pepsi 17 submarines, a cruiser, a frigate, and a destroyer in exchange for Pepsi syrup. This is the famous Pepsi Navy story. You may have seen it on the internet, where it's often claimed Pepsi briefly had the 6th largest navy in the world. According to Foreign Policy magazine, that's an exaggeration. Pepsi was acting as a middleman. The ships were obsolete, and they were immediately resold to a Norwegian shipbreaker for scrap. Donald Kendall reportedly told National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft, "We're disarming the Soviet Union faster than you are." The whole arrangement collapsed shortly after, when the Soviet Union itself collapsed. Now let's jump to today, because this is where the answer to who makes the best soda gets complicated. If you measure best by sheer scale, Coca-Cola is winning, and it's not particularly close. As of May 2026, Coca-Cola's market cap is around $340 billion. PepsiCo is about $215 billion. Coca-Cola brought in $47.9 billion in revenue in 2025, with earnings per share up 23% year over year. The Coca-Cola brand by itself controls about 19% of the entire U.S. carbonated soft drink market. The company has raised its dividend for 64 consecutive years. In March of 2026, about 5 weeks before this video, the company also went through a major leadership change. James Quincy, who had been CEO since 2017, moved up to executive chairman. The new CEO is Henrique Braun, a Brazilian-American executive who has spent 30 years inside the company. So Coca-Cola in 2026 is not just the leader. It's the leader with new leadership, with the freshest momentum it's had in a decade. If you measure best by revenue, though, PepsiCo is bigger, by a lot. PepsiCo brought in $93.9 billion in 2025. That's almost double Coca-Cola's number. But here's the catch. Only about 42% of that comes from beverages. The rest comes from snacks. Frito-Lay, Quaker Oats, Doritos, Lay's, Cheetos, Tostitos, Ruffles. PepsiCo is, in effect, two businesses stapled together. And the soda half is in trouble. Pepsi-Cola, the brand, has been losing share for decades. In 1995, Pepsi held about 15% of the U.S. carbonated soft drink market. In 2024, that number was around 8%. PepsiCo, the stock, is down roughly 25% from its all-time high in May of 2023, its worst slump since the 2007 financial crisis. And in 2025, the activist investor firm Elliott Investment Management took a position in PepsiCo and started pushing for changes. In December of 2025, the company announced it was cutting nearly 20% of its U.S. product lineup and shutting 3 manufacturing plants. And then there's the moment that genuinely shocked the industry. In 2023, according to Beverage Digest, Dr. Pepper tied Pepsi as the second most popular soda in America, both at 8.3% of the market. By 2024, Dr. Pepper had pulled ahead. The number 2 slot in American soda, held by Pepsi for as long as anyone alive has been buying soda, now belongs to Dr. Pepper. Which brings us to Keurig Dr. Pepper, the third giant and the company most people don't even realize exists in its current form. Keurig Dr. Pepper was created in July of 2018 when the coffee pod company Keurig Green Mountain merged with Dr. Pepper Snapple Group in a deal worth $18.7 billion. The new company was now sitting on Dr. Pepper, 7-Up in the USA&W, Sunkist, Canada Dry, Schweppes in the US market, Snapple, Mott's, and Keurig Coffee, all under one roof. Then, in August of 2025, Keurig Dr. Pepper announced it was acquiring a European coffee giant called JDE Peet's, the parent company of Peet's Coffee, Jacobs, Douwe Egberts, and Loire. That deal closed on April 1st, 2026, about 5 weeks ago, for roughly $18 billion. The combined company has pro forma sales of about $28 billion, and the plan, by the end of 2026, is to split the entire thing into 2 separate companies, one focused on beverages, the other on global coffee. Dr. Pepper's own surge has been a slower-burning story. Under CEO Tim Cofer, who took over in April of 2024, the brand has leaned into its 23-flavor identity, the so-called SWICY, sweet spicy trend, and the viral TikTok phenomenon known as dirty soda. The editor of Beverage Digest, Dwayne Stanford, summed up the moment to CNN this way: Dr. Pepper has been gaining, Pepsi has been declining, and they're meeting in the middle. A drink that began in a single Texas drugstore in 1885, that for over a century was largely a regional curiosity outside the South, is now, in 2026, the second most popular soda in America. But the most disruptive story in the soda business in 2026 isn't being told by any of those 3 giants. It's being told by a wave of small companies that didn't exist 10 years ago. The first one is Olipop, founded in 2018 in Oakland, California, by Ben Goodwin and David Lester with $100,000 of their own money. Olipop is a so-called prebiotic soda, chicory root, cassava root, Jerusalem artichoke, with about 9 grams of fiber and only 2 to 5 grams of sugar per can. In 2019, the company did $852,000 in sales. In 2024, it did $400 million. In February of 2025, Olipop closed a funding round that valued it at $1.85 billion. The second is Poppi, founded in Dallas, Texas, in 2015 by Allison Ellsworth and her husband Stephen. They went on Shark Tank in January of 2018 and got a deal with Rohan Oza. Poppi uses apple cider vinegar, fruit juice, and agave inulin. In March of 2025, PepsiCo announced it was acquiring the company. The deal closed on May 19, 2025, for $1.95 billion. It's worth noting that Poppi was also hit with a class action lawsuit accusing it of misleading gut health claims and settled for $8.9 million in March of 2025. The third is Liquid Death, founded in 2017 by a former Netflix creative director named Mike Cesario. He got the idea at the 2009 Vans Warped Tour, watching musicians drink water out of empty Monster Energy cans. So he put mountain water in a Tallboy beer can, slapped a heavy metal logo on it, and sold it under the tagline, "Murder Your Thirst." In 2024, Liquid Death did $333 million in revenue. The company is now valued at $1.4 billion. When PepsiCo paid $1.95 billion for Poppi, a brand that's existed for less than a decade, it told you everything you need to know about who's actually scared and who's actually winning. There is one more force pressing on every company in this category, and it's the elephant in the room. The drugs. GLP-1 medications, Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, have rewritten consumer behavior. By the end of 2025, about 23% of U.S. households had a GLP-1 user in them. Research from a firm called Matson found those users drink 66% less soda and alcohol. Morgan Stanley has forecast roughly a 4% decline in soft drink, alcohol, and salty snack consumption over the next decade because of these drugs. American per capita soda consumption peaked back in 1998 at about 53 gallons a year. In 2025, it's around 42. The companies are responding. Coca-Cola continues to invest in zero-sugar versions, water, and high-protein drinks like Fairlife. PepsiCo bought Poppi and expanded its stake in. Celsius, Keurig Dr. Pepper, picked up the energy drink Ghost. The race is no longer purely about cola. It's about whatever liquid Americans are willing to put in their bodies in an era when many of them want to put less in. So who is making the best soda in 2026? Here's the honest answer. If best means most popular and most profitable, the winner is Coca-Cola. The company that started in an Atlanta pharmacy with cocaine and a bookkeeper's handwriting is still, 140 years later, the largest beverage company on Earth. It survived its own self-inflicted New Coke disaster in 1985. It outlasted 3 Pepsi bankruptcies. It came back from being locked out of the Soviet Union for 13 years. And in 2026, it's still number 1. By every meaningful financial measure, if best means rising fastest, the winner is Dr. Pepper, sitting inside Keurig Dr. Pepper. It's the oldest soft drink in America, older even than Coca-Cola, and after more than 100 years as a regional curiosity, it has finally taken the number 2 slot from Pepsi. With the JDE Peet's deal closed and a corporate split coming by the end of this year, Dr. Pepper is the brand with the most momentum in the entire industry. If best means most innovative, the winner isn't any of them. It's the prebiotic upstarts, and the heavy metal water company, and the Shark Tank pitch that became a $2 billion exit. They forced the giants to spend billions catching up. And the company quietly losing this fight on its own name is Pepsi-Cola, which has been knocked out of second place for the first time in living memory. Even though PepsiCo, the parent company, is doing perfectly fine selling chips, the cola wars aren't over. They've just stopped being about cola.